The morning rush at Denver International Airport was like watching a carefully choreographed dance performed by people who'd never rehearsed together. Business travelers clutched their boarding passes with practiced efficiency. Families juggled strollers and car seats with the desperation of people who'd already been traveling for 6 hours. And vacations stood wide-eyed at the sheer scale of modern air travel. I'd been watching this dance for 23 years as a Transportation Security Administration supervisor, and I thought I'd seen every possible variation of human behavior that stress, exhaustion, and deadline pressure could produce. I was wrong. It was 7:15 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, and the security checkpoint was running at peak capacity. We had 12 lanes open, each one processing roughly 60 passengers per hour, and the lines stretched back toward the ticket counters in an orderly series of switchbacks marked by retractable belt barriers. The system worked because people understood the basic social contract: wait your turn, follow the rules, and everyone gets through efficiently. That's when I first noticed her. She was standing about 50 people back in lane 7, a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair that spoke of weekly salon appointments, designer luggage that cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, and the kind of confident posture that suggested she was accustomed to having doors opened for her literally and figuratively. But it wasn't her appearance that caught my attention. It was the way she kept checking her watch, then scanning the crowd with the calculating gaze of someone looking for an advantage. I'd seen that look before, usually right before someone tried to pull something that would make my day significantly more complicated. I was stationed at the supervisor's podium between lanes 6 and 7, which gave me a perfect view of her growing agitation. She'd started by simply tapping her foot and sighing dramatically, the universal language of someone who believed their time was more valuable than everyone else's. But as the minutes ticked by and the line moved at its normal, steady pace, her body language shifted into something more aggressive. She pulled out her phone and made a call that even from 30 feet away I could tell was going poorly based on her increasingly animated gestures. When she hung up, she stood there for a moment, looking around the terminal with the expression of someone who'd just realized that rules might actually apply to her. That's when she started moving, not forward with the line where she belonged, but sideways, threading her way between the belt barriers with the kind of casual determination that made my supervisor instincts start screaming warnings. I reached for my radio, but something made me hesitate. 23 years of dealing with airport drama had taught me that sometimes the best approach was to let people reveal exactly who they were before taking action. I had no idea I was about to witness the most spectacular display of entitled behavior in my entire career. "Excuse me, sorry, just need to squeeze through here." The woman's voice carried that particular tone of fake politeness that people use when they're about to do something they know is wrong but want to maintain plausible deniability. She was weaving between the barriers now, her expensive luggage bumping into other passengers as she worked her way toward the front of the line. "Ma'am," called out a businessman about 20 people ahead of where she'd started, "the line starts back there." She turned to him with a smile that could have been used to sell ice to penguins. "Oh, I know. I'm just meeting my colleague up here. We're traveling together, but we got separated, you understand." It was a lie, of course. I'd been watching her since she joined the line, and she'd been alone the entire time. But it was delivered with such confidence, such casual certainty, that the businessman just shrugged and turned away. She continued moving forward, using the same excuse with increasing boldness. Just meeting my group up here. My husband's saving my spot. We got separated at check-in. Most people let her pass because confronting a stranger in an airport line requires a level of social courage that the average traveler simply doesn't possess. They had their own flights to catch, their own stress to manage, and one more person cutting in line wasn't worth a potential scene. But not everyone was so accommodating. "I don't think so," said a voice that cut through the ambient noise of the terminal like a sword through silk. The woman stopped mid-step and turned to face the source of the objection. A tall, lean man in his 60s, wearing a worn leather jacket and jeans, with salt and pepper hair, and the kind of weathered face that suggested he'd spent significant time outdoors. There was something about his posture, straight-backed, alert, confident, that made me think military. "I'm sorry," she said, her fake smile faltering slightly. "I said I don't think so," he repeated calmly. "I've been watching you for the last 5 minutes. You started way back there," he pointed toward the back of the line. "And you've been lying to everyone about meeting someone up here." The woman's face flushed, but she quickly recovered her composure. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. I'm actually traveling with my business partner." "And no, you're not," the man interrupted. "You're by yourself. You've been by yourself since you got in line. And now you're trying to cut in front of about 40 people who've been waiting patiently." A murmur ran through the nearby passengers as people began to pay attention to the confrontation. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out, a sure sign that someone sensed potential viral content in the making. The woman looked around at the growing audience, her carefully constructed facade beginning to crack. "Look, I don't know who you think you are, but I have a very important flight to catch, and I don't have time for this." The man's expression didn't change. "Everyone here has a flight to catch. That's why we're all in line at the back, where you belong." That's when I saw something shift in her flash of genuine anger that suggested this conversation was about to take a very different turn. And that's when I realized I was looking at a textbook example of someone who'd spent their entire life being told yes by people who were paid to accommodate them, suddenly faced with someone who had absolutely no incentive to make her comfortable. This was going to be interesting. "Excuse me," the woman's voice had dropped the pretense of politeness entirely. "Did you just tell me where I belong?" The man in the leather jacket didn't flinch. "I told you where the back of the line is. Same place it's been for everyone else. Do you have any idea who I am?" she snapped. And I actually felt a little embarrassed for her. In 23 years of airport security, I'd learned that anyone who had to ask that question probably wasn't nearly as important as they thought they were. "Someone who thinks the rules don't apply to her," he replied evenly. The crowd around them was growing now, passengers from other lines drifting over to watch the show. I could see at least a dozen phones pointed in their direction, and I knew that whatever happened next was going to be preserved in high-definition video. "The rules," she laughed, but it was a harsh, bitter sound. "Let me tell you something about rules. I spend more money on airline tickets in a month than you probably make in a year. I have elite status with every major carrier. I fly first class exclusively And I have been traveling for business since before you were probably even born. And yet, the man said calmly, you still have to wait in line like everyone else. That's when she completely lost it. I do not have to wait, she screamed, her voice echoing through the terminal. I have global entry. I have TSA pre-check. I have every possible expedited service. And I am not going to stand here and be lectured by some. She gestured wildly at his casual clothing, clearly searching for an insult that would properly convey her disdain. Some what? He asked quietly. Some nobody in a cheap jacket who probably hasn't been on an airplane in 10 years. The insult hung in the air like a toxic cloud. The man's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Not anger, exactly, but the kind of cold assessment that comes from someone who's been underestimated before. You're right, he said finally. I haven't been on a commercial flight in about 10 years. The woman smiled triumphantly, apparently thinking she'd scored a victory. That's because, he continued, reaching into his jacket pocket, I've been flying military transport. He pulled out a black leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing something that made several nearby passengers gasp audibly. A military ID, with enough ribbons and insignia to make it clear that this wasn't just any service member. This was someone who'd earned his authority the hard way. The woman's face went white as she realized exactly who she'd just insulted, and exactly how many people had recorded her doing it. But instead of backing down, she doubled down, and that's when things got really interesting. I don't care if you're a general, the woman shrieked, her voice carrying across the entire security area, military or not. You have no authority over me in a civilian airport. The retired officer, because I could see now from his bearing and the way other passengers were looking at him with respect that he was definitely retired. Military calmly closed his wallet and returned it to his pocket. You're absolutely right, he said. I have no authority over you at all. For a moment, the woman looked satisfied, as if she'd won some kind of victory. But he does, the officer continued, nodding in my direction. Every eye in the security area suddenly turned toward me, and I realized I was no longer just an observer. I was about to become the main character in whatever drama was unfolding. I keyed my radio. Control. This is Supervisor Williams at Lane 7. I need additional personnel for a line-cutting situation that's escalating. The woman's head snapped toward me, her eyes wide with something that might have been fear or might have been fury. Line cutting. I wasn't cutting in line. I was meeting my business partner. Ma'am, I said, walking over to where she stood. I've been watching you for the last 10 minutes. You started at the back of the line and have moved forward approximately 40 positions by telling different people different stories about why you need to be ahead of them. That's not true, she protested, but her voice had taken on a shrill quality that suggested she knew exactly how true it was. I have security cameras that recorded the entire thing, I continued calmly. Would you like me to review the footage? The woman's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Around us, the crowd of onlookers had grown to include passengers from at least 3 other security lines, all of them clearly enjoying the show. Now, I said, you have 2 choices. You can walk back to your original position in line and wait your turn like everyone else. Or you can continue arguing with me and find out what happens when someone disrupts security operations at a federal facility. The threat was clear, and for a moment, I thought she might actually back down. Her eyes darted around the crowd, taking in all the phones pointed at her, all the faces staring at her with mixtures of amusement and disgust. But then something in her expression hardened, and I realized that backing down simply wasn't in her nature. "You can't make me go to the back of the line," she said, crossing her arms defiantly. "I haven't done anything wrong. These people are just confused about where I was originally standing." It was such a blatant lie, delivered with such confidence, that several people in the crowd actually laughed out loud. "Ma'am," I said, "I'm going to ask you one more time to return to your original position in line." "And I'm telling you that this is my original position," she replied. "I've been standing right here the whole time." The gaslighting was so complete, so perfectly executed, that it was almost impressive. If I hadn't been watching her the entire time, if there weren't dozens of witnesses and security cameras recording everything, she might have actually gotten away with it. But there were witnesses, there were cameras, and there was about to be a very public demonstration of what happens when entitled behavior meets immovable federal authority. I keyed my radio again. "Control, I need a supervisor escort to the secondary screening area. We have a non-compliant passenger who's refusing to follow security protocols." The woman's face went pale. "Secondary screening. What's that?" That's when I smiled for the first time since this whole thing started, because she was about to find out. "Secondary screening," I explained calmly, "is what happens when a passenger displays suspicious or disruptive behavior that requires additional security attention." Two of my officers appeared beside me, Martinez and Johnson, both veterans with the kind of no-sense demeanor that comes from years of dealing with exactly this type of situation. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said, "we're going to need you to step out of line and come with us." The woman looked around desperately, as if searching for someone who might intervene on her behalf. But the crowd that had gathered to watch her public meltdown offered no sympathy, just dozens of phones recording every moment of her humiliation. "This is ridiculous," she protested. "I haven't done anything wrong. I'm a paying customer. I have rights." "Yes, you do," I agreed. "You have the right to be screened by TSA before boarding your flight. You also have the right to be escorted to secondary screening if your behavior suggests you might pose a security risk." "Security risk?" Her voice cracked with indignation. "I'm a businesswoman. I travel constantly. How could I possibly be a security risk?" Officer Johnson stepped forward. "Ma'am, you've spent the last 15 minutes lying to federal officers, attempting to circumvent established security procedures, and causing a disruption that's affected the screening process for hundreds of other passengers. That's textbook suspicious behavior." The woman turned back to the crowd, apparently hoping to find support among the passengers she'd been trying to cut in front of just minutes earlier. "This is insane," she called out. "They're treating me like a criminal, just for trying to catch my flight." "You mean just for trying to cut in line?" called out a voice from the crowd. It was the military officer who'd first confronted her, and his words carried clearly across the security area. "I wasn't cutting in line," she screamed, her composure finally cracking completely. "I was meeting my business partner." "Why won't anyone listen to me?" "Because you're lying," said another voice from the crowd. "We all saw you You started way back there and worked your way up here, telling everyone a different story. That's not true. But even as she said it, I could see the defeat in her eyes. She knew that dozens of people had witnessed her behavior, that it had all been recorded, and that her lies were about to catch up with her in the most public way possible. "Ma'am," Officer Martinez said firmly, "you need to come with us now. You can either walk calmly to the secondary screening area, or we can escort you there. Your choice." For a moment, she stood frozen, apparently weighing her options. Then, in a last desperate attempt to maintain some shred of dignity, she pulled out her phone. "I'm calling my lawyer," she announced loudly. "And then I'm calling the airport manager. And then I'm calling my senator. You people have no idea who you're messing with." I exchanged a glance with Officer Martinez, who barely suppressed a smile. In our experience, the people who threatened to call their senators were usually the ones who'd never actually spoken to a senator in their lives. "You're welcome to make any calls you'd like," I said, "from the secondary screening area." That's when she made her final, fatal mistake. Instead of walking calmly to secondary screening, instead of accepting the consequences of her behavior with whatever grace she could muster, she decided to make one last stand. "I'm not going anywhere with you people," she declared, sitting down on the floor right there in the middle of the security line. "I'm staying right here until someone with actual authority comes to deal with this situation." The crowd around us erupted in murmurs of disbelief. Someone sitting on the ground in an airport security line wasn't just disruptive, it was the kind of behavior that triggered very specific federal protocols. I keyed my radio one final time. "Control, this is Supervisor Williams. I need airport police and a medical team to Lane 7 immediately. We have a passenger who's refusing to cooperate and may be experiencing a psychological episode." The woman's eyes went wide as she realized what she'd just triggered. "Medical team," she whispered. "Why do you need a medical team?" That's when I delivered the line that would echo through social media for weeks to come. Because anyone who sits down on the floor of an airport security line and refuses to move might be having a mental health crisis. And we take mental health very seriously here. What happened next was like watching a masterclass in how quickly a situation can spiral completely out of control. When someone refuses to accept the consequences of their own actions. The moment I mentioned a medical team, the woman scrambled to her feet faster than I'd seen anyone move in an airport security line. "I don't need a medical team," she shrieked. "I'm perfectly fine. I just want to catch my flight." "Then you should have thought of that before you decided to disrupt federal security operations," Officer Johnson said calmly. But it was too late. The wheels were already in motion. And airport protocols exist for a reason. Once you trigger a medical response in a security area, you can't just wave it off because you've changed your mind. The crowd around us had grown even larger, with passengers from throughout the terminal wandering over to see what was causing the commotion. I estimated at least 100 people were now watching, most of them recording with their phones. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced to the crowd, "we're going to need everyone to step back and give our officers room to work. Thank you for your patience." The announcement had the opposite effect I'd intended. Instead of dispersing, more people gathered, apparently realizing they were witnessing something extraordinary. That's when the airport police arrived. Two officers in dark blue uniforms walked through the crowd with the kind of measured authority that immediately commanded attention. Behind them came a medical team, two EMTs pushing a wheelchair. The sight of the wheelchair seemed to break something fundamental in the woman's understanding of her situation. "No," she said, backing away from the approaching medical team. "No, no, no, I don't need that. I don't need any of this. I just want to get on my plane." "Ma'am," one of the airport police officers said, "we understand you want to continue with your travel, but right now we need to make sure you're okay." "I'm fine," she screamed, loud enough that her voice echoed off the terminal ceiling. "I'm a normal person trying to catch a normal flight, and these people are treating me like I'm some kind of criminal." "No one's treating you like a criminal," the officer replied calmly, "but your behavior has been concerning, and we need to make sure there isn't an underlying medical issue." The woman looked around at the sea of faces staring at her, some sympathetic, some amused, most just fascinated by the spectacle of someone's life imploding in real time. "You want to know what my medical issue is," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "My medical issue is that I'm surrounded by idiots who don't understand that some people are more important than others." The statement hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Even the people who might have been inclined to give her the benefit of the doubt now stared at her with undisguised disgust. "Did she just say she's more important than other people?" someone in the crowd asked loudly. "That's exactly what she said," the military officer replied, "and she said it while trying to cut in front of 40 people who were waiting patiently." The woman spun around to glare at him. "You don't know anything about me. You don't know what I do for a living. You don't know how much I contribute to the economy. You don't know." "I know you think you're better than everyone else here," he interrupted. "And I know that hundreds of people just watched you prove it." That's when she realized the true scope of what was happening to her. This wasn't just a minor airport inconvenience that would be forgotten by the time she reached her destination. This was a very public humiliation being broadcast live to the internet, preserved forever in high-definition video, and witnessed by people who would be talking about it for years. She was about to become famous for all the wrong reasons, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. "Delete those videos," the woman suddenly screamed, pointing at the crowd of passengers with their phones out. "You don't have permission to record me." The demand was so absurd, delivered with such desperate fury, that several people in the crowd actually laughed out loud. "Ma'am," one of the airport police officers said, "you're in a public area of a federal facility. Anyone can record here." "This isn't public," she protested. "This is ... This is harassment. This is a violation of my privacy." "Actually," said a voice from the crowd, a younger man in a business suit who'd been recording the entire confrontation, "there's no expectation of privacy in an airport security line. It's explicitly considered a public space." The woman turned toward him with wild eyes. "Are you a lawyer?" "I am, actually," he replied calmly. "Entertainment law. But I know enough about privacy rights to tell you that everything you've done here is fair game for recording and publication." The legal confirmation seemed to hit her like a physical blow. She staggered backward, looking around at all the phones pointed at her with growing panic. "This can't be happening," she whispered. "This can't be happening to me." "Ma'am," one of the EMTs said gently, approaching with the wheelchair, "why don't you sit down for a minute? You seem upset." "I'm not upset," she screamed, her voice cracking. "I'm angry. There's a difference. I'm angry because I'm being treated like a criminal for trying to catch my flight. You're being treated like someone who disrupted security operations and then refused to cooperate with federal officers," Officer Martinez corrected, "which is exactly what you did." The woman looked around desperately, apparently searching for anyone who might take her side. But the crowd of onlookers offered nothing but judgment and barely concealed amusement. That's when she played her final card. "Do you know what I do for a living?" she demanded, pulling herself up to her full height. "I'm a senior marketing executive at Pinnacle Solutions. I manage accounts worth millions of dollars. I employ dozens of people. I am not the kind of person who gets escorted away by airport security." The announcement was clearly meant to intimidate, to remind everyone present that she was someone important who deserved special treatment. Instead, it had the opposite effect. "Pinnacle Solutions," the lawyer in the crowd said, pulling out his phone. "That's interesting. I wonder what they'd think about one of their senior executives having a public meltdown in an airport security line." The woman's face went white as she realized what he was implying. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I wouldn't what?" he asked innocently. "Share a video of someone's public behavior. Post it on social media with relevant hashtags. Tag the company they work for. That would be destroying my career." "No," he replied calmly. "Your behavior is destroying your career. I'm just documenting it." The distinction was subtle but devastating. She'd spent the last 20 minutes digging her own grave, and now she was being forced to confront the fact that her actions would have consequences far beyond missing her flight. "Please," she said, and for the first time her voice carried a note of genuine desperation. "Please don't post those videos. I made a mistake. I was stressed about my flight and I made a mistake." The crowd around her was silent, waiting to see if anyone would show mercy. That's when the military officer spoke up. "A mistake is accidentally bumping into someone or forgetting to remove your laptop from your bag," he said quietly. "What you did was deliberately lie to dozens of people, disrupt security operations, and then throw a tantrum when you got caught. That's not a mistake, that's a choice." The words hit her like a slap, and I could see the exact moment when she realized that there would be no mercy, no understanding, no way to undo what she'd done. She was about to face the consequences of a lifetime of entitled behavior, and she was going to face them in front of the entire internet. The woman stood there for a long moment, swaying slightly, as the full weight of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. The crowd around her had grown quiet, sensing that they were witnessing something more than just an airport tantrum. They were watching someone's entire worldview collapse in real time. "This isn't fair," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "This isn't how things are supposed to work." "How are things supposed to work?" asked the military officer. She looked at him with eyes that seemed to be seeing the world clearly for the first time in years. "People like me, we don't. This doesn't happen to people like me." The admission was so raw, so completely lacking in self-awareness that it took several seconds for the crowd to process what she'd actually said. "People like you." Someone called out, "What makes you different from everyone else here?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, apparently realizing that any response would only make things worse. Ma'am, one of the EMTs said gently, we really do need you to come with us now. You can continue your travel after we make sure you're okay. For a moment, it looked like she might finally cooperate. Her shoulders sagged, her defiant posture crumbled, and she took a half step toward the wheelchair. Then she saw something that changed everything. A news crew was setting up at the edge of the crowd. A reporter and cameraman from one of the local Denver stations, apparently having been tipped off about the commotion at the airport. The sight of professional cameras seemed to flip a switch in her brain. No, she screamed, backing away from the medical team. No cameras, no nitrogen monoxide interviews. I want a lawyer, ma'am. The airport police officer said, no one's trying to interview you. We just need you to cooperate with the medical evaluation. I don't need a medical evaluation. Her voice had reached a pitch that was physically painful to listen to. I need to get on my plane. Your plane left 10 minutes ago, Officer Johnson said quietly. The words hit her like a physical blow. She staggered backward, her face draining of color. What? Flight 447 to Phoenix, he continued, checking his tablet. Departed. The information seemed to break something fundamental in her understanding of reality. She stood there, swaying slightly, as the full scope of her self-destruction became clear. She'd thrown away her flight, her dignity, and potentially her career, all because she couldn't wait in line like everyone else. But I have meetings, she whispered. Important meetings. My clients are expecting me. You should have thought of that before you decided to cause a scene in security, the military officer said, not unkindly. She turned to look at him, then at the crowd of people recording her, then at the news crew setting up their equipment, and finally at the medical team waiting patiently with their wheelchair. This is a nightmare, she said, her voice hollow. This is all a nightmare. No, I said, speaking for the first time in several minutes. This is what accountability looks like. The words seemed to echo through the terminal, and I saw several people in the crowd nod in agreement. That's when she made her final, desperate play for sympathy. I have children, she said, tears starting to flow down her cheeks. I have a family. Please don't ruin my life over this. The plea might have been effective if she'd made it 20 minutes earlier, before she'd screamed at federal officers, lead to dozens of people, and declared herself more important than everyone else in the terminal. But now, with her behavior preserved in high-definition video and her true character revealed for all to see, it rang hollow. You should have thought about your family before you decided to act like this. Someone in the crowd called out, and that's when she finally, completely broke. What happened next was unlike anything I'd witnessed in 23 years of airport security work. The woman didn't just cry, she collapsed inward like a building being demolished, her entire sense of self crumbling under the weight of public judgment and professional consequences. I can't, she sobbed, sinking to her knees, right there in the middle of the security line. I can't do this. I can't have everyone see me like this. The crowd around her had gone completely silent, the earlier amusement replaced by a mixture of fascination and uncomfortable pity. Even the people who'd been most critical of her behavior seemed uncertain about how to respond to such a complete breakdown. The EMTs immediately moved in, their training kicking in as they recognized a genuine medical emergency. Ma'am, we're going to help you, one of them said, kneeling beside her. Can you tell me your name? Patricia, she whispered through her tears. Patricia Williamson. And I think I just destroyed my entire life. The admission was so stark, so completely without pretense, that it seemed to shift the entire dynamic of the situation. This was no longer a Karen having a tantrum. This was a human being having a complete psychological break. "Patricia," the EMT said gently, "we're going to take you somewhere quiet where you can collect yourself, okay?" She nodded mutely, allowing them to help her into the wheelchair. As they began to wheel her away from the crowd, she looked back over her shoulder at the dozens of phones that had recorded her meltdown. "Please," she said, her voice barely audible, "please don't post those videos. I know I don't deserve to ask, but please, I have a daughter. She doesn't need to see her mother like this." The plea hung in the air as the medical team wheeled her away toward the private screening area. For a moment, the crowd stood in uncomfortable silence, processing what they'd just witnessed. Then someone said what everyone was thinking: "It's too late for that." Because it was. The videos were already uploading to social media, already being shared across platforms, already making their way toward viral status. Patricia Williamson's breakdown wasn't just a private moment of humiliation. It was about to become internet content. The military officer who'd first confronted her was standing near me, watching as she disappeared into the secure area. "You know what the saddest part is?" he said quietly. "What's that? This all could have been avoided if she'd just walked to the back of the line when I first called her out. 15 minutes of waiting versus having her life destroyed. And she chose this." He was right, of course. Every escalation, every lie, every tantrum had been her choice. She'd been given multiple opportunities to de-escalate, to accept responsibility, to show even a shred of human decency. Instead, she'd chosen to double down, again and again, until there was nowhere left to go but complete collapse. "What happens to her now?" asked someone in the crowd. "Medically, she'll be evaluated and released when she's stable," I explained. "Legally, she likely faced charges for disrupting security operations. Professionally, ... I shrugged. "That depends on her employer and how viral this goes." As if on cue, someone's phone chimed with a notification. "Holy shit," they said, looking at their screen. "The video's already got 50,000 views on TikTok. 50,000 views and climbing." Patricia Williamson's worst moment was becoming entertainment for millions of strangers, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The crowd began to disperse as the immediate drama ended, but I could hear conversations continuing as people walked away. "Did you see how she just completely lost it? I can't believe she thought she was better than everyone else. My daughter's going to die when she sees this video." Within hours, Patricia Williamson would be a household name for all the wrong reasons. She'd become a cautionary tale, a meme, a symbol of entitled behavior facing consequences. But first, she had to face the immediate aftermath of her choices, and that was just beginning.